The most expensive lie in modern America is not that you can get rich quickly. It is that a household earning the median income is supposed to feel secure. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The median household in the United States brings in roughly $83,000 a year. That number is supposed to represent the center, not luxury, not excess, not private jets and vacation homes. The center, the stable middle, the income that should buy you enough room to breathe, enough room to absorb a broken transmission, enough room to survive a medical surprise, enough room to raise children, without feeling like every month is a test of endurance. And yet for millions of families, that number does not feel like stability. It feels tight. Tight enough that one repair, one rent increase, one deductible, one child care bill, one insurance spike, or one missed week can turn the whole month into a balancing act. That is not because households forgot how to budget. It is because the toll gate moved. That is the frame I want you to use for this entire story. A toll gate. Most people think the economy works like this. You earn money, you choose how to spend it, and what remains becomes your freedom. That is childish. The modern economy does not begin with choice. It begins with tolls. Tolls to live near work. Tolls to get to work. Tolls to insure yourself against the system. S-own fragility. Tolls to let two parents work. Tolls to keep a child watched while the household earns the income required to pay the other tolls. Tolls to be considered functional, employable, insurable, respectable, and reachable. You are not entering a marketplace with free discretion. You are pulling up to a gate. And the people who still talk about poverty using an old number built for a different world are pretending the gate is still where it was 60 years ago. It is not. It has moved miles down the road. That is why the official story and lived reality no longer match. The official story says that a family of 4 above roughly $31,000 is above poverty. The lived reality says a household earning far more than that can still be one broken axle away from panic. The official story says the line is low because it is meant to measure deprivation. The lived reality says the line is being used as the doorway to help, and the doorway now opens miles before a family reaches anything that resembles stability. That gap is not a semantic problem. It is an operating system failure. When a society uses one benchmark to describe struggle and another benchmark to actually live, people start disappearing into the crack between the two. They are not poor enough to count. They are not stable enough to breathe. They are not reckless. They are not extravagant. They are simply paying the tolls of modern participation and discovering that the old map no longer matches the road. That crack is where a great deal of middle-class anxiety now lives. I do not want to speak about this politely because polite language has already done enough damage when economists, politicians, and institutions use outdated benchmarks as if they are neutral. They are not just describing reality badly. They are subsidizing denial. They are telling households that the pain they feel must be mismanagement or shifting expectations or personal failure because, according to the official arithmetic, life at their income is supposed to be manageable. But if the arithmetic is old, the judgment built on top of it is rotten. That is the first principle. Rotten arithmetic creates rotten policy. Rotten policy creates invisible suffering. And invisible suffering is one of the most efficient ways to weaken a country without ever announcing decline. Let me show you the mechanism the way I would show it to a board, trying to understand why a business keeps missing its targets, even though the spreadsheets still look respectable. You start with the revenue number, about $83,000. That is the headline. Then you subtract taxes. Federal income tax, payroll tax, state tax in many places. The source document walks through exactly this sequence and notes that the usable pool often lands in the mid-$60,000 range after those deductions. That is the real starting number, not the one people quote at dinner. The one the household actually gets to operate with. Now the toll gate begins working. Housing arrives first because housing always arrives first. If you own with a mortgage, you may still be squeezed. And in higher cost states, the squeeze gets ugly fast. If you rent in a major city, the annual bill can easily run into the upper 20s before you have done anything except occupy legal shelter. The source uses a simple working example of about $28,000 a year for a median income renter household in a major city. That one line item alone can carve the usable pool from the mid-$60,000 range down toward the upper $30,000s. Then transportation. America loves to talk about mobility as if it were a moral feature of the culture. In practice, mobility is a bill. Most working households cannot simply refuse the car. The labor market is designed around it. Commuting is designed around it. School logistics are designed around it. Childcare logistics are designed around it. The source adds another roughly $10,000 for fuel, insurance, maintenance, registration, and financing. A second toll, a large one, then healthcare. This is where the official narrative becomes truly absurd. The source points out that family employer sponsored coverage in 2025 carries an average total premium nearing $27,000, with workers still contributing around $6,800 before they have seen a single doctor, before deductibles, before copays, before anything goes wrong. That is not a footnote expense. That is a structural toll, then child care. And here the whole middle class myth begins to crack open. The source cites center, base care running above $10,000 per child on average, and in many places far more. 2 children can place another $20,000 to $30,000 on the household without adding a single luxury item to the cart. At that point, the budget can already be underwater. And as the source notes, that is before groceries, utilities, or savings. Read that again in plain English. Not before vacations, not before restaurants, not before luxury cars, private schools, designer clothes, or foolishness. Before groceries, before utilities, before savings. That is the toll gate. And once you see the toll gate, you stop talking about these households as if they simply need better discipline. Discipline matters. I respect discipline. I have built my life around rationality and delayed gratification. But rationality cannot negotiate with fixed costs that have outrun the framework used to judge them. A family cannot stoically spreadsheet its way out of a structure in which participation itself now carries prices the old benchmark never anticipated. That is why I call them participation tolls, not lifestyle choices, not overspending. Participation tolls, the car is not optional if your job sits across a metropolitan geography built for cars. Child care is not optional if 2 incomes are required to survive the cost structure. Health insurance is not optional when one bad diagnosis can vaporize whatever stability you think you have. Housing is not optional because human beings still need an address. Once those items become contractual, recurring, and largely unavoidable, they are no longer ordinary expenses, they are entry fees, and entry fees are different because they redefine what counts as enough. Now let us go backward and inspect the old formula, because this is where a lot of the national confusion starts. The official poverty threshold was built in the 1960s around a simple observation. Families of 3 or more spent roughly 1/3 of their income on food. So the architect of that measure priced a minimal food plan and multiplied by 3. That gave a rough floor for what was too little. It was never built to describe comfort. It was never built to define a healthy middle. It was never built to tell you what stable life should cost. It was built to say below this line, things are probably unacceptably thin. The source walks through this exact origin story. Food times 3. That was the model. And for that time, the logic had a kind of rough coherence. Housing was manageable relative to income, employer. Sponsored health insurance was more common and less punishing. College did not yet behave like a heavily financialized toll. Childcare was not yet the industrial scale market expense it would become, because household structure was different. The multiplier was not beautiful, but it was not absurd. That world is gone. Today, the source notes, food at home is closer to about 8% of average household spending than 1/3. That alone should make any intelligent person stop. If the benchmark was built on food, S share of the budget, and food S share of the budget has collapsed while housing, healthcare, and childcare have exploded, then the benchmark is now describing a planet that no longer exists. That is the benchmark illusion. The benchmark illusion is what happens when a number survives long after the world that made the number sensible has died. Institutions love these illusions because they reduce the political cost of admitting reality. A frozen benchmark can keep official distress looking contained even while lived distress spreads. It is the statistical equivalent of repainting a cracked wall and calling the structure sound. The source performs a thought experiment on this exact issue. If you kept the original logic but updated the multiplier to reflect food S actual share of today S household budget, the implied poverty threshold for a family of 4 would not land around $31,000. It would land somewhere around $130,000. The document explicitly says this is not a policy proposal, only a thought experiment. Good, it does not need to be a proposal to be revealing. Its power lies in showing how radically the cost structure has shifted while the official doorway has barely moved in spirit. That one thought experiment exposes the scale of the lie. I am not saying every household under $130,000 is poor. I am saying the old benchmark has become nearly comical as a guide to what it costs to stand upright in the present economy. There is an enormous difference between a floor and a life, and the country has grown lazy about that distinction. Now we arrive at the part that disturbs me most, because this is where stale arithmetic stops being merely inaccurate and starts actively harming behavior. Public assistance programs are tied to thresholds, fall below them and help appears, rise above them and help disappears. On paper, this looks rational. In reality, it can create what the source calls the benefits cliff. And that cliff is one of the nastiest hidden toll gates in the American system. The source gives a step-by-step example of a single parent with 2 children whose gross wages rise, only to trigger the loss of food assistance, then child care support, then health coverage at several points. Gross income rises while net resources actually fall. That is not upward mobility, that is a staircase with trapdoors cut into it. I call this the cliff toll. The cliff toll punishes movement through the very band of income where families are trying to stand on their own feet. Below the line, support exists far above the line. Private purchasing power may exist. But in the corridor between official help and real independence, households are asked to absorb market prices without having actually reached market strength income. That corridor is financially savage. And the truly cruel part is this. The people living in that corridor do not show up in official poverty statistics the way you would expect. They become statistically fine and economically fragile at the same time. That is one of the reasons so many people feel like the numbers are lying. Because the numbers are telling one story about income while the toll gate is telling another story about life. A country that ignores that gap will misread its own population. It will think resentment is irrational. It will think family formation is mysterious. It will think risk. Aversion is cultural weakness. It will think entrepreneurship is merely a matter of inspiration. A person does not start a business easily when losing one steady job can also mean losing the employer health plan that anchors the household. A family does not rush to have another child when child care behaves like another mortgage. A worker does not freely relocate to a high-opportunity city when the housing toll has detached from local wages. A young couple does not view the future the way their grandparents did if the median house sits at 5 times annual income nationally and much worse in major metro areas. As the source notes, that is the second-order damage. The toll gate does not just drain current cash flow. It narrows future behavior. It delays children. It postpones home ownership. It reduces mobility. It discourages risk-taking. It keeps people in jobs they do not love because the fixed costs are too hungry. It makes the economy look richer in aggregate while households act more frightened in detail. That contradiction is not irrational. It is the precise outcome you would expect when baseline participation costs rise faster than the benchmarks used to interpret them. There is a moment in the source I particularly respect because it cuts through a lot of ideological nonsense. During the pandemic, commuting stopped. Many work-related tolls paused, childcare arrangements changed, and the U.S. personal savings rate briefly surged to almost 32%, the highest ever recorded according to the source. Stimulus mattered, yes, but the source makes the deeper point. Millions of households suddenly stopped paying some of the daily participation tolls that had been quietly draining them. For a brief moment, people saw what their finances looked like when the gate eased. That is one of the cleanest accidental experiments of the modern era. Take away the tolls and households exhale, bring them back and the squeeze returns. That tells you something essential. The stress was not imaginary. The households were not simply irresponsible. The gate was real. And when the economy reopened, the source notes that many of those costs returned even higher. Mortgage rates jumped sharply from the ultra-low levels of early 2021 to well above 6% by early 2023. Home ownership became unaffordable in many more states. Property insurance rose, employer-sponsored health premiums rose further. The gate did not merely reopen. It raised its prices. This is why I do not have much patience for people who talk about aggregate prosperity without inspecting household mechanics. Yes, the country can be richer by many measures. Yes, more households can be crossing nominal income thresholds. Yes, the share of households above certain inflation. Adjusted income cutoffs can rise, as the source points out, but if the stable life associated with those thresholds has itself become more expensive, then the apparent graduation into prosperity may be partly an illusion. The source makes exactly that argument around the shrinking middle and the idea that households are not necessarily graduating into affluence so much as chasing a moving price tag for ordinary stability. That is the middle-class mirage. A mirage is not total fantasy. There is water somewhere, there is income somewhere, there is progress somewhere. But from the vantage point of household life, the distance between nominal earnings and genuine breathing room can still remain enormous. The family may earn what once sounded rich and still feel one injury away from disorder. That is not a contradiction. That is repricing. The stable life has been repriced. The country has just been slow to admit it. Now I want to become even more direct because this is where the Buffett part of the story matters most. When you misprice baseline stability, you do not merely create temporary discomfort, you damage capital formation in the broadest sense. Families cannot save as much, they cannot invest as much, they cannot take intelligent risks. They cannot form businesses as easily. They cannot relocate toward better opportunities. They cannot build the buffer that separates a setback from a collapse. They become more linear, more defensive, more short-term, more obedient to the immediate demands of the system. That is exactly what expensive toll gates do. They convert potentially compounding families into maintenance households. A maintenance household is not building much upward momentum. It is spending most of its energy on continuation. Keep the car running, keep the insurance active, keep the rent paid, keep the child cared for, keep the health plan alive, keep the family inside the gate, keep showing up, keep participating, keep paying. There is no shame in that. But there is danger in pretending that such a household is fine simply because it stands above an outdated official threshold. I want you to notice the language shift that happens when institutions get lazy. They move from asking whether families are stable to asking whether they are officially above poverty. Those are radically different questions. Stability asks whether the household can absorb shocks, save, plan, and move. Official poverty asks whether the household has fallen below a floor built in another era. One question is about life. The other is about statistical eligibility. A civilization that confuses the two will spend decades surprised by its own dissatisfaction. Now, what should a rational person do with this knowledge? First, stop using old benchmarks as moral judgments. If a household earning well above the official poverty line still feels fragile under the pressure of fixed participation tolls, that does not automatically mean the household is delusional. It may mean the benchmark is obsolete for the question being asked. Second, stop mistaking optional spending stories for the heart of the issue. Yes, some households waste money. Yes, discipline matters. Yes, consumerism is corrosive. I have no interest in excusing foolishness, but the source is very clear that the core expenses driving this squeeze are not luxuries. Housing, transportation, healthcare, and childcare are the dominant fixed cost engines. A family can cut restaurant spending, streaming subscriptions, and vacations, and still remain trapped if the toll gate itself is too high. Third, understand that policy built on stale inputs creates behavioral distortions even when the intentions are good. If help disappears long before self-sufficiency becomes realistic, then the system punishes incremental progress. If the benchmark remains politically convenient but economically unrealistic, then society starts misclassifying struggle. People in the gap between help and independence become invisible. And invisibility is how institutional trust dies. Fourth, if you are an individual household, you must start thinking like a capital allocator under toll pressure. That means respecting fixed costs with almost ruthless seriousness. It means treating low fixed cost living as a source of strategic power, not deprivation. It means understanding that the house payment, childcare structure, health insurance dependence, and transportation model are not just bills, they are gates. And the higher those gates, the less optionality you retain. Worker versus owner, buffer versus exposure, participation versus freedom. Those contrasts matter more now than they did when the old benchmark was created. The more of your household energy goes toward maintaining basic participation, the less remains for compounding. And compounding is what separates a family that merely survives from one that can finally refuse bad jobs, absorb shocks, take calculated risks, and buy time. That is why this subject is not only about poverty, it is about freedom. A stale poverty line does not simply undercount hardship. It disguises how expensive freedom has become. That is the real indictment. A country can tell itself it is prosperous while making the stable life so costly that households stop behaving like confident builders and start behaving like permanent toll payers. They delay children, they postpone homes, they fear movement, they cling to benefits, they avoid risk. They stay in place because every gate is expensive and every misstep can be punished by markets much harsher than the old formulas admit. That is not the psychology of abundance. That is the psychology of price participation. And once you understand that, the emotional confusion around modern middle-income life begins to disappear. People are not crazy. They are not especially soft. They are not all bad at money. Many are simply living in a cost structure that the official narrative still refuses to price honestly. That honesty matters because truth is the beginning of rational adaptation. If the gate is higher than the old map says, then pretending otherwise will not make households freer. It will only make them blame themselves while the toll collector keeps raising the price. So let me leave you with the real choice. You can keep repeating stale benchmarks, old formulas, and comforting stories about what median income is supposed to mean, or you can look directly at the gate, look at the taxes, look at housing, look at transport, look at health care, look at child care, look at the benefits cliffs, look at the way fixed participation costs are now swallowing the income that old policy still treats as safely above distress. That is the honest audit. And once you make that audit, the country looks very different. Not poorer in a theatrical sense, not doomed in a melodramatic sense, just repriced. Repriced in the most important place of all, the cost of standing upright without panic. That cost used to sit lower. Now it sits higher, and until our measurements, our policies, and our private decisions admit that millions of households will keep doing what looks irrational from the outside and feels completely rational from the inside. They will keep acting careful. Because when every month begins at a toll gate, caution is not fear. It is arithmetic. And arithmetic, unlike slogans, does not care what the old line used to mean. It only cares what the gate charges now.